right. Today is January 21, 2017. Let's ask our Heavenly Family to bless our gathering. Eloheinu, mighty ones, thank you so much for everything that you're doing for us. Thank you for love. Thank you for suffering along with us and guiding us to understand principles that have been lost throughout the dark ages, and we recognize that we have gone so far astray and have had such a lack of love and a lack of understanding, and have really been doing everything contrary to truth. So please help us to be entirely freed from every element of the path of darkness. Help us to see the light of truth, to rejoice in it, and to love each other, and to love the world just like you do, and do everything that we can to bring about salvation. Thank you so, so very much. Guide us in our discussion tonight. Help us to learn what we ought to learn and to bring it into our very lives. Todah, thank you. We ask this b'shem semach, in the name of Branch. Amen.
Amen.
All right, so as I mentioned last night, we will be continuing on with questions tonight, questions and answers, and particularly we want to focus on any questions that relate to topics that are of difficulty to people, or are a big burden in one way or another, or something that someone struggles over. We want to focus on the things that are coming to the foundations of the message, or the principles upon which the message is based, or big topics, things like that. There is certainly a time and place for asking about, an interpretation of a passage here, or little things here and there. That's not what we're wanting to focus on this time. We want to focus on the big things because, those are obviously the more important aspects. Everything has a degree of importance, but these are certainly more important, and we want to be able to address them. So I know, yesterday I know that some of you guys are like, oh man, wish I had some time to think about this. So hopefully you've been able to think of some of the questions that you'd really like to ask. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have been pondering. So feel free if anyone has anything.
Hi, Trent. I have at least a couple, but we'll just start out with the first one because I don't want to dominate with all my questions. I've been continuing to witness to various strangers as well as my family and friends, and I've noticed frequently the question about cults have come up. And then I was reflecting on even my own personal story. I mean, my husband divorced me because him and his family were convinced I was in a cult, and that was when I explained to them that I had grown up in the Seventh-day Adventist household. And, I've been researching it, and I really don't have a good answer to give my friends and family. And I was just wondering if you can help explain that the Branch is not a cult.
Okay, that is a very, very interesting question. So the first thing that I would do if someone was to either ask me or accuse me in relation to this whole cult question, if they were to ask, so is this a cult? Or if they were going to accuse me of being a cult member or bring an accusation against the Branch movement as a whole as being a cult, I would ask them what their definition of cult is, how they define it and what they mean by that. And, I wouldn't do it in an argumentative way, of course. I'd explain how, hey, different people have different understandings of that term. How do you understand it? And whatever definition they provide, I'll be happy to go with that. In other words, I'll accept their definition, because just in life people define things differently, and I'm not going to, quibble over words or whatever. So if they say that, a cult is any group which is small, destructive to its members, separatists, and so on and so forth, which might be one of the common definitions that you'll get, well, then I'll just explain how the branch isn't actually that. Yes, right now it's small, but it's whether or not it's destructive to its members is something that the burden of proof would be on the person who wants to make that claim. If people define a cult as a group with false doctrines, then that's a whole other issue, because what defines what is true doctrine and false doctrine, and so on. So, I think most Christians define cult by a group with false doctrines, because the majority of evangelical Christians would say that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is a cult, and that the Mormon Church is a cult, and that the Jehovah's Witness movement is a cult, and all of that. And what they mean by saying that is that, those groups teach things that are contrary to evangelical doctrine. Well, that's just the same as saying, we are the Orthodox and they are the heretics. In other words, we're the right ones, they're the wrong ones. So it's, if that's what they mean, well, then I would say, I think that that's not the most helpful way to categorize things, because it's starting off just saying, hey, we're right, you're wrong, and because we think that you're wrong, we're going to call you a scary name. And I would just explain how I don't think that that's fruitful for discussion, just because we believe something that you consider to be in error. You label us with this very electrical name, for lack of a better word. So if that's how they define it, I'll just say, hey, you know what, if this is about doctrine, let's talk about it in terms of doctrine, and we can explain why we believe what we believe, and you can explain why you believe what you believe. And, if it's just about doctrine, the problem with that, too, is that we would be just as justified to refer to others as a cult. And then some might object, no, but see, you guys are just a small group. So then if it comes to the small group thing, then that becomes an issue too. And different historians of religion, I'm trying to remember, I'm trying to remember her name, Francesca something, but she's a historian of religion and of the Hebrew Bible and so on. And I remember once there's a British show called The Big Questions, and in it they talked about religion and what is a cult and so on and so forth. In this particular episode of that show, I've seen a few episodes on YouTube which deal with issues in some way relevant to the branch message, like is God a woman, and different things like that. But she pointed out that really the way that people use the term cult, there is no difference between a cult and a religion other than the number of adherents. So, like, for instance, if you take everything that goes on within the Roman Catholic Church, including what might be appropriate to refer to as an out-of-control issue of molestation, if you take that and move it down to, Kentucky, and have it in someone's acreage and all that stuff going on in a barn with all the same beliefs of the Catholic Church and everything, well, people would then call it a cult just because there's a few people and it's out in the country somewhere. That's basically what would happen. So if it's all just about size, then basically the more popular people get to decide what is a cult and what is not a cult and all of that. So that's kind of, I think people understanding that might help them to say, hey, wait a second, maybe we shouldn't judge so quickly because, hey, there was a time when the Jesus movement in the first century was considered to be very, it was small. They had unusual beliefs that were different from the majority, and they were focused on a charismatic leader, which is another thing that sometimes people view as one of the defining factors of a cult. They have to have some sort of leader as an authority figure who is unquestioned, whether it's a group or one individual. If that's what people are defining as cult, an unquestionable and unquestioned authority, then we can definitely show that the branch isn't that, because how we talk about authority and truth and all of that, it's not dependent, truth is not dependent on an authority figure. No one and nothing gets to decide what is true. Truth is defined by correspondence to material reality. In terms of authority, we believe that any genuine question is worth asking, and people are encouraged to question things and challenge things and all that sort of thing. So if that's part of the definition of cult, well, then the branch simply isn't included. If they define it simply as a small group which has doctrines which are unusual, as in simply uncommon, then sure, we can accept that and say, hey, if that's all you mean by cult, then yeah, right now we are a small group which has some unpopular views on things. And if that's what you mean, then sure, we'll accept that label, so long as you understand who else is included with that label. The early Jesus movement would certainly be included. Abraham and his family would certainly be included. There's a number of people throughout history that would be included within that definition of cult. There's a lot beyond that to the issue, but ultimately it comes down to labeling and what people mean by their terms. And I would really try and encourage people to say, hey, you know what? We can throw a whole bunch of things in a category, but that's not the helpful way to go about things. The best way is to deal with everything on its own merits. So if you want to know what the branch message is about, what the movement is about, and all of that, please do look at it for what it is. If you judge it to be in some way negative, then please provide the reasons why, and we can see, if it's based off of a misunderstanding or anything like that. And otherwise, if it's just that you disagree with the teachings and the group is small, well, then don't look at that as a negative thing, because it's not the fact that something's small and has unusual perceptions does not mean that it's wrong or that it's dangerous or bad in any way. So all of that, I wouldn't necessarily say all of that to any individual. I'm just trying to give you a little bit of variety of what might need to be said or explained or asked in different circumstances, depending on someone's perception and what they mean by calling the branch movement a cult and that sort of thing, and what they're willing to discuss. Like if someone is just really kind of upset about it and closed-minded about it entirely, sometimes there's not much that can be said, but to show them that, hey, you love them, you're trying to do what's best and all of that. A lot of people associate being in a cult with separatism, and so show how much you care about your family and friends and all that, and try and demonstrate to them that you're not the one trying to withdraw from them and stuff like that. So hopefully that's helpful. That brings to mind a couple broader issues which don't directly relate, but whether I comment on that or not, I just want to ask if that's helpful, or if you want to specify more what the people that you're talking to have in mind, if you know, and if you want me to expand on any elements, you can let me know. But how, is that helpful to you at all?
Yeah, in kind of a broad way, it's helpful more for just complete strangers, but it's just been elevated to me so much more recently because, part of our different studies and so much, there's, the parts of the separation or isolation where I'm not participating with my family, because my family as a group celebrates every birthday together and every major holiday. And I've come to the conclusion that I don't want to participate in birthdays, and I don't believe in a lot of the holidays that they celebrate, so I completely exclude myself from that. The other piece, which I think really set off some alarms, particularly for those that I honestly want to believe they have my best interests, such as my parents directly, when they've since learned that I've canceled my health insurance with a very serious history, they absolutely think that I'm being irrational, and they have massive concerns for my overall health. And I think that was a big flag. And so we researched together some common definitions of a cult. And one thing my mom said is Christina, I'm very concerned about your brainwashing in these organized religions, and it's not healthy for you.
Well, there's several aspects. First, I want to comment on the aspect of, parts where you have withdrawn from certain family activities, just because that's one that I can directly relate to. So that's where I'll start. With my family, they all celebrate Christmas and birthdays and all that, and it's always a big thing. My whole life, when we were growing up in Alberta, my brother and I, we would always go to for Christmas Eve, we'd go to Mama and Papa's house. That's my mom's side of the family. And then for Christmas Day, we'd go to Grandma and Grandpa's house. That's my dad's side of the family. And it would always be a big event, all the families there. On my dad's side of the family, there would be family reunions and stuff like that every year, and very, very family oriented. And birthdays were never a huge big party and stuff like that, but it was always a thing. And yeah, all the different celebrations and all of that. And at first, my family was very much, especially my mom, she was troubled by the fact that I wasn't participating in those activities anymore. And, there were times where she felt like I was putting her in a bad place and having to choose between me and my brother and, things like that. And what I have found to be most helpful, and it's not like I've been able to have a conversation with everyone in my family, extended family included in all of this, but I, try to emphasize the difference between separating from certain activities and separating from them. And the other thing that I think is helpful is to, in some way, in the kindest way possible, show them how, hey, look, you have certain things that you do that you would like me to be a part of, and that I have been a part of in the past, but I'm not anymore. But I also have things that I do that I would like you to be a part of. And I understand that just because you aren't celebrating the events that I'm celebrating, I get that doesn't mean that you are separating from me. It's just that you don't celebrate those events. And so, like my immediate family, I've talked to them about that sort of thing and saying, hey, I think about you guys on all the different feast days and all of that, because I would just love it if we were able to keep those things together. And, but I understand that they don't. But here's the thing, like often, and Teresa and I have talked about this several times, unfortunately, what happens, and I'm sure this happens to us, and I'm sure that it happens to other of you guys as well. It's like when we, as branch believers, I'm sure this happens to other people of other religions, when we go to visit with people who don't share our belief, unfortunately, people want us to kind of ignore what's really important to us and to not really be ourselves in order for them to spend time with us. And yet, for us to bring those elements of ourselves in, for some reason is taken as an offense or something like that. And
if they don't like it.
Yeah, they don't like it. If we just, are straightforward about, hey, who we are, what we do, if we talk about the things that we're interested in, then, oh, well, don't want to hear that. But yet it's expected of us to take interest in the things that they're interested in. And if we don't, we're viewed as separatist. But that's not right. I mean, basically, it would be the same thing in reverse, just because they don't take interest in what we take interest in, that doesn't mean that we, should accuse them of being separate from us or whatever. We just have to acknowledge, hey,
or we're not going to talk to you or enjoy ourselves unless you're talking about the things that we want to talk about.
Right.
But that's basically, often the way it is in the reverse.
Exactly. And so I think it's important for people to recognize that while, yes, when we come to this belief, we do end up changing our activities, just like anyone of any belief has different activities from other people and so on, that's very different from separating. And if, most often what happens is that people at least mentally separate from us rather than the reverse. And I think it's really important for people to recognize that that's what they're doing so they don't end up coming with, accusations of trying to separate and all that sort of thing.
Like it would be completely dishonest of us to pretend to be on board with things that actually work contrary to our convictions. And so if we were to continually bring things up to people, family members or friends or whatever, who don't share our beliefs, if we would continually bring up things to them that are important to us, they would perceive us as coming across overbearing or pushy or insensitive or, and the reason we know that is because it's, it's not happened in an extreme. It's not like we've been in contact with repetitive present truth topics or anything like that, but, it's you can tell it's either direct or indirect sometimes, but, it would be better. The nicer thing to do often is still perceived as separating, that being the nicer thing to not continually talk to someone about something that makes them uncomfortable.
Right. So, coming to kind of the second issue that you mentioned dealing with health insurance and all of that, and the perception, and you mentioned brainwashing and so on. Again, those are terms that I think people use far too freely, and I think it's important for people to recognize, like, or for people to know, like, why is it that they think that someone is brainwashed? Why do they think that? Is it just because they believe something different from what they used to believe? Because that's not what brainwashing actually is. And again, these are hard circumstances no matter what, and not everyone is going to be willing to reason through things like this and all of that. But I think, it can help people, like, so, if we just ask them sincerely, so why, with an open mind, like, why do you think I am brainwashed? And, why is that? And if they explain why, then that might lead to other questions like, oh, well, you used to do things like this, and now you do things like that, and, you're just different now, and you think differently. And, well, if those are the sorts of reasons that they give, you can ask, well, are you sure that's really brainwashing? Is it possible to you that maybe I have just studied things and come to different conclusions and that sort of thing? And if they can acknowledge that, hey, that's a possibility, then they might have some more respect for it and deal with things differently. If it's a matter, and, if it comes to the issue, like, the most important thing is the principle, but I'll use the issue of health insurance as an example anyway. You could explain how, hey, this isn't something that, someone made a decree and told us this is what we have to do. Months of study went into this where everyone was contributing, and it's not like anyone came with an answer saying, hey, guys, this is the way it is. Everyone abide by this. It's everyone's studying it out, everyone's contributing, and people are, some individuals through this have come to convictions as to what they ought to do. And so that might be helpful, and you could say, hey, look, we have all these things recorded.
I was going to say, maybe it would be helpful in your specific situation, Christina. I know you don't have the audio files, but if it would be helpful for you to have them, even though they're not edited or anything, what we could work on is, I just have to make sure that I protect anybody else's privacy too, But if there's some way that we could get the files listened to make sure that there's nothing personal from another individual that shouldn't be put out publicly, then your family could have access to listen to exactly what was our mode of thinking, how did we discuss these things, what was said, what was not said, even more importantly sometimes. In other words, nobody was told, you have to cancel your health insurance. And maybe that would help. So if so, let me know, and we can definitely make that a priority.
And here's the thing. I doubt anyone is going to want to go through, like someone who's not a branch believer or interested, I doubt anyone's going to want to listen to, like, everything. And so just because that's a lot of studies.
That's true.
So we could find one or two.
Well, one of the last ones, or two or three of the last ones, where we're basically summing it all up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually, that's really good, doing one or two of the last ones. And then, of course, offering the rest if they really were interested.
Demonstrating transparency in itself could help to break down some of the barriers. Whether someone's willing or desirous to go and listen to things or not, showing how, look, we're open to sharing what we've been going through, and we're very research-oriented and all of that, very much so not dogmatic, and perhaps even sending the Q&A stuff on the bdsda.com website might help to kind of ease someone's nerves in showing that, hey, look, this is absolutely not dogmatic at all. So
I do sympathize with people outside of the branch. So I actually do sympathize with your parents, Christina, even though I sympathize with you more because you're in a really tough situation. I understand very much how you're feeling and what you're going through. But I also can see why, from your parents' perspective, they would be fearful for you because they don't know. Now, if they aren't willing to find out, that's a different story. Then that shows a very wrong mindset and an unwillingness to just want to know what the truth is. But, just recognizing that, like you said, they do have your best interests at heart or in mind, and like they probably are very uncomfortable too, not knowing, I can imagine having not even actually met your parents, of course, but I can imagine them being uncertain and scared to approach you on certain things and, not wanting to come across a bad way and whatever. And then maybe still even doing all those things, that happens. But, I can only see how, the only thing I can see that can really solve this is to, or at least try to solve it, is to try to be as transparent as possible and just welcome them, invite them to find out for themselves what is going on. And we'll do whatever we can as far as providing studies that are already out there for the public, to do whatever we can in that regard to help.
I have a question. Can I ask?
Sure.
What exactly is the definition of a cult?
There are actually multiple definitions, some of which are negative. Not all are negative, though. But I'll pull up and read to you the definition from, I think this is the New Oxford. It's the New Oxford American Dictionary. Okay, so there's a few definitions here. Okay, so here's the first definition. A system of religious veneration and devotion directed toward a particular figure or object.
So would that mean any religion that worships God would be a cult?
Yes. See, there's
or
nothing,
not just God, but any religion that worships a deity.
Worships any deity or any idol or anything. This is if you read scholarly literature, people talk about the priestly cult of Israel, or the cult of Asherah, the cult of Yahweh, the cult of Molech. If you read historians of ancient religion, it's always the cult of this, the cult of that, and it's never with a negative connotation. Mm-hmm. It's just that this is a system of veneration to a particular deity.
Yeah, I was going to say, in watching all these scholarly talks and lectures, like the word cult doesn't faze me much anymore because it's freely used in a very neutral way, like just not a big deal.
Right. So here's a second definition, which is more common when people use it in a negative way. A relatively small group of people. So actually, first I want to say, in regard to the first definition, by that definition, this group is a cult, just like Christianity as a whole is a cult, or Judaism, or Islam, or Hinduism, or any religious system, period. So if that's someone's definition, we don't have a problem with that. The second definition, a relatively small group of people having religious beliefs or practices regarded by others as strange or sinister. So that's the second definition. Under that definition, we would, by other people, also be defined as a cult because we are a relatively small group of people having religious beliefs and practices which are regarded by others as strange and even possibly sinister, depending on who is doing the regarding. So by that definition, this would also be classified as a cult. But likewise, the early movement surrounding Jesus would be classified as a cult. You can read in Acts 25, where Paul was accused of being the ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, or the heresy of the Nazarenes. They would also be classified as a cult. Every religion in its infancy is classified by others as a relatively small religious group with beliefs and or practices regarded as strange or sinister. That's literally how every single religion starts. That's what distinguishes a religion from the others at its beginning, is that it has something different, something other. And so by other people, it's considered strange. And every religion starts with a relatively small group of people, and so on and so forth. So someone may use that definition, but I think that it's worth pointing out that that doesn't mean that what we have to say is wrong, and it doesn't mean that it's bad or negative. It just simply means that, right now we're in the place that every religion once was in at its beginning.
Also, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I was just saying. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, I was just going to say that there are two more definitions that are here, but if what you want to comment on is relative to this definition, then go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask is, by the definition, does it have to be a small? Because there's, there's one particular group just off the top of my head I was seeing a documentary on who believe this one guy is Jesus in the Philippines. He's got over 1 million, followers, and quite wealthy off of it too. So is it so much defined by a small group, or is there another definition that would encompass a large group?
This definition says relatively small. So relatively, of course, is relative. 1 million people in regard to world population is still just a fraction. So some might, again, this is all, one of the key words in this definition is the word regarded. So regarded and relatively. So it's a relatively small group. So that's relative as compared to what? As compared to something else. So if someone's part of a group that has 1 billion people in it, then the other group with 1 million, that might be considered small. However, if someone is a Seventh-day Adventist with under 20 million people, and they see another group with 1 million or 5 million, that's not that small. So it all depends on the perspective of the person and the size of group within which they find themselves. And then that will determine how they regard the size of another group.
Well, what would be some of the beliefs that would be considered in a cult? I mean, what are they actually referring to here?
It's broad, like the definition itself is intentionally broad because it is, again, whatever is regarded as strange to whoever it is. So the point is that there are people who look at a certain group as having strange beliefs. So the fact is, this is broad enough, like if within a Christian culture, and that's particularly Protestant, well then a belief that is different or that it sounds different to Protestant ears would classify someone as being in a cultic group if the group is small and has those beliefs. But if you're in another part of the world that is predominantly Hindu or that is predominantly Muslim, then another belief system, even a Christian belief system that, something that might not seem too odd to Protestants, would be regarded as strange there. So if you have a small group of Catholics, let's say, in a country that is predominantly Hindu, and it's just a small group of Catholics, and they gather together, and they are celebrating the Mass, and they have the Eucharist, and the flesh and blood of Jesus, that's going to seem really strange to those people. And the Hindus in that country are going to look at the Catholics as essentially being, quote-unquote, a cult.
According to this definition.
Yeah.
Isn't it also that, most of the time when the label cult is placed on a group, it's because they feel somewhat threatened by their very existence?
In popular usage, that is often the case because it's viewed as strange or even sinister. So that's definitely a possibility. So I want to read these other two definitions here just because it gives a broader range. So the third definition is a misplaced or excessive admiration for a particular person or thing. So example, a cult of personality surrounding the leaders. So someone, and this can be used even broader than a religious context. Like you might have, basically cult admiration for a particular celebrity. And people might not look at that as dangerous, but they might look at it as excessive. Like, oh man, these guys are pretty cultic in their way of going about it. And people might even use that phrase in a joking way, but still recognize something as excessive in admiration. And then
people refer to certain like shows or something, like, I don't know, cable shows or TV shows as cultish, and it's almost a positive thing.
You're talking like, like basically cult movies, things like that on a particular subject, and it's like it appeals to a particular group of people who are really enthusiastic about that particular series or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Totally. Okay, last definition 4. A person or thing that is popular or fashionable, especially among a particular section of society. A cult film. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how that's used. So that's kind of interesting because it's actually something that is popular or fashionable.
Yeah.
So,
I was going to say it's almost venerated, but
yeah. So
a cult classic. I've heard that term, a cult classic.
A cult classic. There you go. So this is, these are all these are the definitions in the New Oxford American Dictionary. As you can see, it's not something that is identifying something as certainly bad or whatever. It's just something that in some context is regarded as bad. So again, I mean, I think that the word, unfortunately, has just been used in a way to cast a shadow on something or to be particularly negative about a particular thing or group. But that's not helpful to anyone in the group, like saying, oh, you're in a cult. Like, even like people, there are psychologists who specialize in cults and that sort of thing. And I highly doubt that any psychologist would recommend accusing someone of being in a cult as a means for bringing someone out of what they perceive to be a cult. So, you know, I mean, it's not really helpful to use it in the way that people use it. So hopefully some of those definitions help.
Well, what I'm thinking here is, you know, we're talking about, you know, the community rules, and we're talking about, you know, implementing some of this stuff among us, and I'm just wondering how is that going to be viewed? You know, are people going to look at us like we're a cult or something? And I'm not quite sure what I'm saying. It's just that this is kind of like a topic of, it's just interesting. I mean, I'm not really sure what I need to say here, but that kind of concerns me that, you know, we're talking about implementing the community rules among us, and how's that going to look to the world, and what will happen with us? I mean, is that going to be so radical that they're going to look at us like we're abusing each other or something? Or, you know, I mean, I don't know. Do you get what I'm saying here?
Oh, I totally get what you're saying. The community rule and the system that it speaks of, interestingly enough, I mean, well, okay, first, before I even get into that, I want to say we are already viewed as a cult by the world. So implementing the community rule system, I don't think is really going to change much in terms of how people perceive us. Implementing the community rule, I think, will just help the movement in terms of being better organized, being able to function better, and that sort of thing. But I will say that the ancient Essenes, while they were recognized as living in a different way, people actually viewed that positively for the most part. Like if you read Pliny, Roman historian, and if you read Philo, who was an Alexandrian Jew who talked about the Essenes, and if you read Josephus, who talked about the Essenes, they all view them as particularly righteous people, particularly pious. Yes, maybe unusual, but they view them in some way in a positive sense.
Makes you think of Amish.
Yeah, like the Amish, and people view the Amish differently too. Some people think it's just like a really cool thing. Others think it's a cult. And, you know, there's kind of different views on that. In our system, doubtless, no matter what, whether the community rule is involved or not, there are some people who already do view us as a cult and who will continue to view us as a cult. And there are others who are going to look at the situation more honestly, you know, in terms of, you know, here we are, we don't have electricity other than a generator and things like that here at the Living Branch Center. And some people might, you know, gasp and think that this is some surprising thing, but there's a lot of people who are living off the grid and stuff like that. And so, you know, people around here so far in observing our setup, maybe some people are skeptical and stuff like that, but for the most part, people seem to think that what we're doing is kind of cool. the religious association, in a broader perspective, in terms of how the world might view us, a lot of it is going to come down to media. But the fact is that we live in the age of alternative media as well. And even like the David Koresh movement, there's a lot of people who view that very negatively, and that is especially the case within the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But outside of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, there's a lot of people who look at the David Koresh movement and say, oh, they weren't really a cult. This is just government oppression on American citizens who happen to believe an unusual belief, no big deal. And then in terms of scholars looking at the David Koresh movement, most scholars look at that movement as being unusual, yes, highly religious, yes, maybe with some dangerous elements, and scholars are divided over that. Some scholars view it as just very devoted and so on. Other scholars see, yes, there were some dangerous elements and so on. But yeah, I mean, we could definitely be viewed negatively, and we will be. But that, again, most of the world views the Seventh-day Adventist Church as a cult in some way, and so on. So I guess the bottom line, I was reading Paul's writings earlier today, and in his day, the Nazarene movement was definitely viewed negatively, to the point where, hey, he was getting put in prison for it. And if you read Roman writings from the early 2nd century regarding quote-unquote Christians were viewed very negatively. They were totally viewed as being a cult. When they would gather together and have the Lord's Supper, it was viewed as a totally messed up, cultic, dark ritual. Christians were accused often of getting together and having sexual orgies, things like that, which is really strange because even in Orthodox Christian writings, I'm not talking Nazarene, I'm talking Gentile Christian writings, sexual immorality is condemned. And so, but these were perceptions going on at the time, and people were even killed because of these perceptions within the Roman Empire. And that's just the way it was. And unfortunately, people have some of those mindsets still today, but I am very hopeful in terms of the perception of the branch today, simply because this actually comes to a broader aspect that I want to mention. The branch movement is a very, I'll say the branch movement and message, the whole branch thing. That's how I'm going to label it for the sake of this aspect of the conversation. The whole branch thing is a very broad thing. And like in talking to a friend, he was asking, well, why do you even call it a religion? It seems like it's more of a science or something like that, or an approach to research and to existence, or it's a philosophy, or it's a this or that. And the problem is all these categories fall short when trying to describe something as broad as the branch. Because, when people say religion, today in Western society, we view that as a system of beliefs and so on and so forth. That's part of what the branch is, but the branch is a lot more than that. People in Western society view religion as separate from politics. In the ancient world, religion and politics were inseparable. There are historians who have argued that there's no such thing as ancient Judaism as a religion. There was no such thing as, there was a way to live as Jews, but it was a cultural phenomenon. And Jews in the Second Temple period worshipped Yahweh, but even before that, the Israelites, there was no one Israelite religion, and there was different focuses, but, every ancient society, their religion was their government, was their economy and everything. Like the bank in ancient Judea was the temple. That was the bank. The people who were the high priests were the bankers. The governing authorities were, in a very practical sense, the priestly class. But, of course, there was the Roman system too. But the Roman system, guess what, was another religio-political system where the leader of the government of Rome was also considered the son of God. So the emperor was also the son of God and the leader of the Roman religion as well as government. I mean, even the leader of the Church of England is the Queen of England. So it's really not people separate categories in certain ways in certain societies, and we live in a society where people view religion as one thing, and the way that people view religion is far more narrow and even different from what the branch thing really is. The branch is an approach to life. It has what people would consider religious elements. It has political elements. It has social elements. It has philosophical elements. There's a lot to this branch thing. And, in ancient Judaism, well, if I can use that term, it's not really right, but Jews in the time of Jesus, they didn't have a word for religion that corresponds to our word for religion. They didn't have a word for Judaism that corresponds to our word for Judaism. There is a word that occurs in Jewish literature that is translated sometimes Judaism, but it's referring to doing things as Jews do things. And that same word is used to refer to people from Athens doing. I think the word it's in Greek. It's Judaismos.
So like and, Judaizer even.
Yeah, the word Judaizer is connected. It's a different form of the word Judaismos, and it's doing things the way Jews do things. And Athenesmos is doing things the way Athenians do things. People from Athens. There's another word, I forget the Greek word for Spartan, but it's the Spartan way of doing things. And it's encompassing just kind of like general characteristics of Spartans, kind of like a stereotype of Spartans, and doing things in a Spartan way is that same thing. Doing things as people from Athens do things is that same thing. Jews behaving as Jews do, that's what it is to, have Judaism. So that's what it is. It's not a religion, how people would define a religion. And so, the branch, is it a cult? Well, by some definitions. Is it a religion? Well, by some definitions. But all of these words fall short in expressing what this whole branch thing really is.
But people want to put things in a box.
People absolutely want to put things in a box. But the fact is you can't understand the branch for what it is if you confine it within a certain label, if you confine it as being a religion or a philosophy or whatever. The way I think that is maybe the best to describe it is a way. And we would say it is the way, of course, but there's the way of darkness and there's the way of light. The branch is a way. It's a way of everything. It's a way to do all things in life. A way of life, perhaps you could use that phrase. I'll just say it's a way. And so I know this kind of broadens things a lot in our way of thinking, but I hope that it's helpful in trying to capture what this is. And I think in the branch being put forward in its true breadth, that will help people to not accuse it of being what it is not. And so, how the branch movement comes to the forefront in society will be a huge factor in how it is viewed. If we come to the forefront by means of negative media attention, well, then it will have an initial negative view as being a cult or whatever it may be. If we come to the forefront through dialogue with philosophers or with religious people or with, whoever, that's going to paint a different picture of the branch. Ultimately, though, the truth is going to come forward, and however that must be, that'll be okay. Even if it is initially a negative thing, I, for one, am okay with that. Even though, it would be better otherwise, and I think we should do what we can to make it otherwise. But even if it has to be negative, not everyone is going to just simply buy a negative picture of the branch. And there will be people who will look at the movement seriously and give it an honest judgment, and who will be vocal in correcting misperceptions concerning the branch. Rest assured, that's definitely going to happen. So I know this kind of has broadened to other aspects of questioning. I just wanted to ask Christina if this discussion has kind of, in its extension, if it's helped with kind of your initial, I guess, challenge that you're going through. I know that it doesn't help the actual circumstance yet because the circumstance is still what it is, but hopefully it'll help in kind of processing how to go about it.
Yeah, I'd say it's definitely at least clarified some aspects and just prompted me to do more diligent study and then, engage appropriate friends or family as, different light and truth comes to fruition. So, yes, thank you.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
So, whether anyone has follow-up questions on the things we've been discussing, or if someone else has a serious question in relation to this branch thing, then by all means.
Oh, yeah, I have a question. I talked to a few Davidians, Chapter people, when they have negative views about the branch, because they would tell me the previous prophet, like the Brent Molden, or they would tell me some other people's character, what kind of negative thing that they have done, and the law would not. So they are like a deceitful people or something. But I mean, so how I view it, I just listen. I haven't really done much research yet, but so far, I just been reading about those people writing, and I don't really know about their personality thing, because it was a history. But those people would tell me that they met them and they know these people, so they kind of act like eyewitnesses. So I just want to share that, but how I haven't really done much research, so not many incidents, but so far this is kind of negative things about branch to me. But
sure.
I haven't done,
No, that's
Can you repeat her question so I can understand what she was asking? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'll be happy to. Okay, so she's saying that in talking to different Davidians, there are some people who are basically saying the branch must be wrong because of the character of previous messengers, and this person was, deceitful or a bad person or whatever, these different things. And some say that they've met these past messengers like Ben Roden or Lois Roden and people like that, and they have their eyewitness testimony as to how they were bad people or did bad things or whatever. And so the question is, how do we approach those sorts of circumstances? So I'll address things in two different categories. I'll address first those who may be saying things negative about the character of, let's say Ben Roden or Lois Roden or Doug Mitchell or whoever, without having met them. And then I will comment on those who have negative things to say about these individuals who actually have met them, or who at least say they have. So first, if there's just people who are speaking negatively against Ben or Lois or whoever and haven't met them, and they've just heard negative things about their character, I would emphasize, and perhaps the best way to put it, I would educate them in terms of proper principles of investigation. That is the most important thing. When people are judging whether or not someone is a true prophet or whether or not the message they had was true, by the character of the individuals, that shows that they are not conducting a proper investigation. And depending on who the person is, will determine how I go about showing them that. So if it's a Davidian, then I will show them what Victor Hoddeth had to say about proper investigation. And you can search through Victor Hoddeth's writings. There are many things that he has to say concerning investigation, and he specifically says that we cannot judge a message by the character of those proclaiming it. Rather, we must judge it by the message itself. There are many, many statements from Victor Hoddeth to that effect. Let me just see if I can pull up just an example. I'm sure that I have somewhere a collection of Victor Hoddeth statements on this very point. So I'll keep talking and see if I can pull up the quotes as I'm talking. So if it's Davidians, again, I would show them Victor Hoddeth statements in terms of proper investigation. If it's Seventh-day Adventists, I would show them Ellen White's statements in regard to proper investigation, that being that we must judge the truth for what it is. If they're Christians, I'll show them Bible statements and so on. But in all things, what I will be trying to communicate is the principles of investigation. That being that what someone says, and I'm just focusing on the principles that are most relevant for this issue, the truthhood or falsehood of what someone says is independent of their character. Anyone can understand this. Someone could kill someone and then look up and say the sky is blue. Their statement is not wrong because of what they did. It's a totally separate issue. In terms of the character of someone, you can judge that. If someone really does something wrong, then they do something wrong, and you can't justify that just because they had a good thing to say. But likewise, you can't say that what someone said is wrong just because of their character or whatever. So for Seventh-day Adventists, one of the things that Victor Hoddeth pointed out is that, there are many people who reject the 30 Angels message because of the character of the Seventh-day Adventist leadership. But that's not right. People shouldn't do that because people should investigate the third angel's message according to the third angel's message. Is it actually right on its own, or is it wrong? One of the things, and we kind of went through this in talking about the principles of inspiration, one of the things that is worth pointing out to people is the strange acts and sins of the prophets. So we can show, okay, well, Balaam did all these horrible things, and yet he spoke the word of Yahweh. What he spoke was not wrong because of what he did. Moses was a murderer. He ran away from the law. He was disobedient to the command of the Lord. But it didn't mean that his message was any less true because of his mistakes. Elijah was a man of like passions as we are. He even did things that are seemingly selfish and did some strange activity like stretching himself on a young boy alone in a room. And he allowed himself to be discouraged, even to the point of asking the Lord to take his life. That didn't mean that his message was wrong. Isaiah walked around naked. Well, that's weird. Does that mean that his message was wrong? Abraham committed adultery and was also a polygamist. That doesn't mean that what he said was wrong. Jacob, he was also a polygamist and he committed adultery. That doesn't mean that what he said was wrong. David committed conspiracy to murder and went through with it. He was a polygamist. He committed adultery. He lied. That doesn't mean that what he wrote is wrong. Solomon was a polygamist, an adulterer. He was also an idolater. Doesn't mean that what he said or wrote is wrong. The list goes on and on and on. We could go on with the different prophets. Paul, he, of course, had done some pretty bad things, and he did some things that people would view as bad, even if they aren't bad, such as using quote-unquote profane language. He used words at times which in his day were considered vulgar expressions or swear words, but that doesn't mean that what he was saying was wrong. There's many, many examples that could be given, but simply put, someone's character, someone's behavior is separate from the truth value of what they say. And when we investigate a message, we need to investigate it as a message, not investigate the people to determine whether the message is true or not. It goes both ways. Someone could say something that's true and yet be inwardly corrupt. So you can't use the fact that they say something like that, their message is true, as an evidence that their character is true. You can't do that. There are people who have said and anyone knows this. If you talk to a Seventh-day Adventist, you can point out preachers who were good preachers and who said, wonderful things and who preached the truth, but had some personal sin and then ended up being exposed, or they confessed it one day or whatever. Well, it doesn't make all the things that they said false just because they had a personal sin. Likewise, if you see someone and they have sins, it doesn't make what they're saying, false. That's just the opposite way to say the same thing. Yes, Teresa?
Yeah, and this might be helpful for you, Rachel, in talking to Davidians that you're talking to. You can go to the track number 6 called Why Perish. It's the one that has the picture of the dairy on the front. It's called the Universal Dairy. And around page 46, 47, there's a little section that starts. It says, reflections cast upon one's character do not affect the truth. And that might be a good section to go to as well for that group of people, for the principle involved. And one of the things that he brings out here, he being Victor Houteff, one of the things that he brings out is Balaam and how, he was commissioned to curse Israel. And he was not a righteous person. but he was still used as just for the principle. Like, let's say, I'm not saying who. Well, we all know that nobody has been completely free from sin in the branch movement. In the past, there's, Ben and Lois weren't free from sin. Doug wasn't free from sin. These are the things that still do not. Ellen White wasn't free from sin. Victor Houghton wasn't free from sin. These things don't have any bearing on the message. And you have Balaam, who prophesied of Christ's coming. Christ. He prophesied of Jesus the Messiah. And Houghton brings out, so are we going to repudiate Christ just because a wicked prophet prophesied of his coming? That's a really good point. And anyway, that's a section that might be helpful.
Excellent. Yeah, there's lots of places where Victor Houghton talks about this principle. Ellen White talks about it too. The examples in the Bible are quite clear. So, these things just have to be judged separately. And the other thing, too, that might be helpful for someone is to say, hey, look, let's just stick to what is direct. Because, honestly, if they really believe that a message is false anyway, they should be able to show that the message itself is false apart from the activity of the messenger or messengers. When I investigated the message of David Koresh, I knew that he had guns. I knew that he had sex with underage girls. And I knew that it was wrong. And I was like, okay, well, that's bad. But I know that there are other people I was thinking at the time, well, hey, look, I acknowledge these other people as messengers. I'm thinking ancient prophets and so on, and they were polygamous and this and that. Well, why, if I'm going to judge him for that, then shouldn't I judge them? So I recognized it was a double standard. And then I realized, I was like, wait a second. If David Koresh was a false prophet, his message will be wrong. So why waste my time with his activity and trying to judge him by that when I would be having a double standard? I'm just going to go directly to his message and see whether it's right or wrong as a message. Like, are the claims that he makes true or false? And if they're false, well, then the message is false, and I know that it as a message is actually false, independent of his character.
Even if he was super nice.
Yeah,
it wouldn't mean his message was true.
Exactly. Even if he had an upstanding character, it wouldn't mean his message is true. So the test always comes down just to the message itself. And so I investigated the message and concluded it to be false because of its claims, not because of the activity of David Koresh. And so that's how we have to go about it. And that's the sort of principle that I would encourage any Davidian or any Adventist to take when it comes to the branch message is, hey, look, even if you think that the messengers are corrupt, if they are really false prophets, then their message will be false. And so therefore study the message as a message and judge it on that rather than on something else, which is entirely incidental. And then when it comes to those who say that they have met individuals and find them to be corrupt individuals, again, I would remind them that even if their experience that they had in meeting the individual was negative, and if they view the individual to be corrupt, that doesn't mean that the message was false. Likewise, you have to question, was your experience of the individual an accurate reflection of who they are? Can you really judge their character by your experience in meeting them or knowing them or whatever? How would you have judged the character of Paul? How would you have judged the character of another person? And what is really the cause behind your negative view of the person? So first, I want to mention something. I know an individual who says, and they swear by this. They really to them it is. They are totally unable to be shaken from this experience. They say that in 1989, Lois Roden and David Koresh came and traveled to where they were, and that they were together having a sexual relationship, and they were in cahoots. They were friendly with each other, and it was all like they were in support of each other, teaching together, and that they got there and they have a very specific memory of Lois Roden getting out of the car and then David Koresh getting out of the car and David Koresh going up to this individual and saying, "My sister," the individual is a female, my sister, "you are the Holy Spirit." Okay, so that's what this person says. And they've said this to me, and they're absolutely disgusted by Lois Roden, and they have this testimony concerning the time when they met Lois Roden. And they're so certain, and I'm like, "Are you sure that's the time that you say it was and everything?" And yes, it was in 1989 at such and such a place and all this. Problem, Lois Roden was dead in 1989. Lois Roden died in November 1986. They swear that this experience that they had was in 1989. Well, if it really was in 1989, then that was not Lois Roden. Whether it was a demon impersonating Lois Roden or whether it was just simply another individual who they mistook to be Lois Roden, that's another question. But we can know for sure that it was not Lois Roden. We have her death records. We have a whole bunch of other things we can demonstrate quite easily. This wasn't like it was that long ago. It's not like a huge, complicated reconstruction of history. It was in modern times when history has been kept very carefully. We know for sure exactly when Lois Roden died. It was on November 9, 1986. That definitely was not her. And if they are so confident in the date and in the event, and they were wrong on that, then perhaps they shouldn't be so confident in what they perceive to be the reality of Lois Roden. So that's just one instance. There are other people who knew Ben and Lois and so on, and say, they have a version of the history of what happened, and they speak negatively of their characters and all of that. Well, here's the thing. What I would say to someone like that is, you know what? There are other people who knew these same people and have a very different picture of who they are. So who am I supposed to believe? Well, the fact of reality is I wasn't there, and therefore I can't accept your testimony or that person's testimony just because you said that you were there and this is what you saw and this is your experience. No, I have to go and what I have from this individual is their writings, and I have to investigate it to see if their message is true, and that's it. I've talked to people who say that they knew Lois Roden and that she said certain things and at a certain private meeting, and then I know other people who say they were at that exact same private meeting and Lois Roden said the exact opposite thing. Well, my answer is I can't go by that. I can't go by someone's,
hearsay.
Yeah, it would just be a hearsay report. I can't do that. I have to just look at whatever the evidence before me is and judge a circumstance based off of that. Hey, likewise, I'm not going to say if someone said they had this experience, I can't say, well, your experience is wrong when I wasn't there. But I can say that it's important to not go by our quote-unquote experience if we're defining experience by simply a circumstance through which we passed. No, judge it based on the message. And that's what I would encourage even to someone who says that they met a certain prophet and they had a negative experience. And, what was the negative experience? Was it that you were rebuked and you don't see it as valid? Or was it that, they said something and you didn't like it? Or, what was really the experience? But in all things, it comes down to the message. Does that help answer your question, Rachel?
Yeah. Actually, I got some of the answer what you said before, but that was really good. That clarified on this situation too. Thanks.
Wonderful. All right. Well, we've been on for an hour and a half now. I know that there are more questions, but I'm thinking that we should, continue on. Like, even if we are to extend this meeting a little bit longer, I can tell there's more questions that we'll have to have further meetings addressing. So I'll see if there's one other question that someone has that might be particularly pressing. And if you have stuff, but it's not necessarily pressing, maybe wait to see if someone else mentions something, if they do have something that's particularly pressing. And if it's not going to take a really long time to go into it, then maybe we'll do one more tonight, and then we can continue on next weekend with more questions. So does anyone have a pressing question?
I do. It's in regards to something that you said earlier. And,
sure.
You're talking about prophets in the past, and you were referring to in Paul's day, and then you were talking about, you're not to look at their character, you're to look at their message and everything. However, what is the difference in the days of Paul versus our days in which we believe that people are being born again now, and how would their character be versus what Paul's character was in his day?
Interesting question. Okay, so the principles as they apply in Paul's day apply the same way today. Now, I will say with Paul actually in his writings indicates that he had been born again. In Galatians 2, verse 20, for example, he indicates that he was no longer living his own life, but living the life of Christ. And so when I referenced Paul, there are the things that he did before his conversion that were certainly wicked things, and he acknowledged them to be wicked. And then there are other things which could just be perceived as wrong that are not actually wrong. So, for instance, he used some words and expressions at times that were in fact vulgar expressions or quote-unquote swear words in his own day. And some people think that saying a word that is considered to be taboo is actually morally wrong. But there is actually nothing morally wrong with using a word which is considered to be taboo or profane or vulgar or whatever. And we can get into that discussion, and if you actually want me to explain some of those principles, I will. But I'll mention first another aspect. So if Paul makes the claim to being born again, as he does, but I hesitate to use the word claim because it's not like he's putting it forward as something. It's just that his language indicates that that's the experience through which he passed, and that's how he understood his own experience. If someone makes a claim in regard to their message which deals with their own actions, then it can be tested as a claim still. But it's not testing their actions for the sake of their actions and then projecting that onto the message. It's testing a claim of the message, and if that claim so happens to include realities of the person's character, then that is just the case. So, for instance, just to kind of express what I'm talking about more clearly. Okay, so David Koresh had sex with multiple underage girls. That is wrong. I'm not going to say that his message is wrong because he did those things. I'll say what he did is wrong, some of which he acknowledged to be morally wrong. But this is just, let's just take the issue of having sex with multiple women who are even wives of other people, and some of them underage girls who weren't old enough to make those sorts of serious decisions themselves, and he clearly manipulated some of these girls to have sex with him. So that's one thing that he did. I can say that that's wrong. We can go into the reasons why that's wrong. But because he did those things and because they're wrong doesn't mean that the things that he said were wrong. So he could say the sky's blue, and just because he abused girls doesn't mean that the sky isn't blue, right? So he could say a whole bunch of things, and it doesn't mean that what he said is wrong just because what he did is wrong. And that's actually, in philosophy, that's known as a logical fallacy, where you actually you try and accuse a claim as being wrong because the person who makes the claim does something wrong. There's actually no logical connection between the two. So you have what he did, it's wrong, and then you have his message, and for independent reasons, I can certainly say that it is wrong. The claims that he made are false. But here's one thing which actually ended up connecting the two. David Koresh did many immoral things, which he acknowledged, and some of them he said are actually immoral, such as lying and certain other things that he did, which he acknowledged to be wrong, including certain sexual sins, which he acknowledged to be wrong. However, taking multiple wives and having concubines and all of this sort of thing, and even having sex with the young girls, he said that that wasn't wrong. He said that that is entirely in harmony with Scripture, and that God told him to do it. Okay, so now that's making a claim as part of his message. He actually said that it was part of his message, that it's actually part of the marriage of the Lamb and all these other things. There's a lot of theology attached to that idea of having sex with all these girls. And he's saying that it was a right thing, that it was morally good. Well, now, that thing that he's doing that is part of his character is being brought over into the message itself. And because it's brought over into the message, and because those things are morally wrong, but the message claims that they are morally right, I can now say that, no, his message is actually wrong, not simply because he did those things, but because his message proclaimed that those things are right to do. So that's where it kind of carries over. Likewise, if you have a message which has as part of the message claims concerning the positive character of individuals, let's just say the message of the Nazarenes made claims concerning the positive character of Jesus. Well, if those claims are factually false, well, then the message is false. Not simply because of the character of the individual, but because the claims concerning the character do not match reality. Likewise, Paul made implied claims concerning his own character, which, if they are false, would mean that his message is false. So that same principle applies today, but it all comes down to the claims of the message. What does the message actually claim, and are those claims true, or are they false? Of course, when a message makes a claim concerning the positive character of an individual or individuals, one has to be careful to not make false accusations, because obviously people accuse people for things all the time. So someone might accuse Paul and say, oh, well, you say that you're living the life of Christ, but you're morally wrong because you use certain words which I find offensive. But if they don't understand morality and they're accusing something, they're basically falsely accusing Paul because he offended them, when really he didn't actually do anything that's wrong. So that's something that someone would have to be careful of. So does that help to answer your question, Rebecca?
Well, it sort of does. I guess that'll work, I suppose.
Well, if there's an element like, and I don't know, if it's just kind of hard to define, then that's okay. Like, you're not expected to expand more. But if there are aspects that are still, like, if you think it might be helpful for me to address another aspect or expand on something or whatever, certainly feel free to mention it, and I'll be happy to, address whatever other aspects might need addressing.
Well, if there were people born again in those days, when did that all stop? And then when did being born again come back on the scene? And if
Okay.
we're in that realm now, how many people are actually born again?
That's an excellent question. Okay, so people were being born again in the days of Paul. How long that lasted, I do not know. It may have only lasted for about a couple decades. That's possible. But if you read the letters of Paul, he speaks of different individuals who had obtained the righteousness of Christ, and he spoke to some even, I believe in Galatians, he refers to some of them in Galatia who had received the righteousness of Christ and then turned back on it. Already by the early 50s, probably even the 40s of the first century, there was already people coming into the Nazarene faith who were corrupting it. And so the age of glory, so to speak, for the Nazarene movement did not last long. And, probably by the 2nd century, so the year 101 and thereafter, I don't know if there was anyone at that point who was still, living a righteous life, although there could have been. Like, I can't put a specific date on it because we just don't know, the individuals. And keeping in mind, we're really only talking about in the context of the believers in Jesus and so on and so forth. There may have been other people scattered and, people in North America or whatever who, even though not knowing the gospel, may have been living according to the principles of truth and love. And that has been the case for all ages, really.
Yeah, it's more rare. It's, not like there's many of them, but Paul talks about that.
In Romans chapter 2, yeah.
Yeah, he says that when the Gentiles do by nature that which is in the law, that they become a law unto themselves. And basically, even though they don't know about Jesus, so long as they're living according to reality and the principles of love, that they will still be saved.
Absolutely, and they are actually saved from sin if that's what they're doing.
Right.
So basically, there is, that's one aspect of things. So in terms of, there's the falling away from righteousness, and so throughout the Dark Ages, when the last person who was really living a righteous life within the Nazarene movement died, I don't know. I don't know exactly when it was, whether it was the end of the 1st century, the middle of the 2nd century, somewhere around there. But by the time you get into the 3rd and 4th century and stuff like that, there's no more righteousness in the earth. And that lasted a very, very long time. And the claim of the message is that righteousness has not sprung up in the earth, particularly, again, within the movement. There may be people just scattered throughout in heathen lands, to use a phrase from Ellen White, who truly decided to give up selfishness and to live a righteous life. It's not excluding the possibility of that. But in terms of the professed people of God, righteousness has been entirely lacking until the advent of this present message. And in terms of how many people have actually overcome, that's a question that, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how many there are.
Well, you don't even know within our own group here how many?
That's correct. I don't know.
In Paul's writings, he seemed like he's continually calling people saints and holy, like they were overcomers. You don't talk about other things, but it seems like he's not talking like we got to keep on sinning.
Well, he certainly doesn't talk like we got to keep on sinning. Saints or holy ones, those expressions don't necessarily refer to people who are walking without sin, although in some contexts it does. In some contexts, it refers to the divine council, even including wicked gods. It's just that they have been set apart as the council. So, the expression can be used differently. But yeah, I don't know who, how many people have or who has specifically or who has. I mean, I do know the spiritual condition of certain individuals within the branch movement, certainly, but our Heavenly Family has not revealed to me how many people have given up sin and how many have not.
You wouldn't think that Paul would be calling people something they're not. No.
I agree with that.
Just like God doesn't.
Sure.
We're not justified
I
if we're not justified. Excuse me. Go ahead.
Certainly. I just wanted to ask Rebecca, if answering those elements has helped at all.
Well, I just really wanted to see it in action. I really wanted to see what it actually looks like.
I'm confused as to what do you mean by that?
I guess because Jesus isn't really here, that we can actually look at him and see how that functions in this world. I just wanted to see, is there someone who's really here who really functions by that? Because I would like to see it. I would like to see how does that work in our day.
Well, what I'll say is the most important thing is to learn the principles and to do everything possible to understand them and to bring them into your life. Though I will say also that it is to have a living example in front of yourself is certainly, can certainly be a good thing, and that's what our Heavenly Family wants to do. That's the idea of the wave sheep and taking people and saying, hey, look, this is the example, or this is an example of what it is to live Christ's life, and it's a light to the world.
Isn't the antitypical David figure spoken of as being given as a covenant to the people?
Are you asking me or asking the other people on the call?
Well, anybody who wants to answer. It may be that what you're wanting has already been shown for some time. And I believe that there are prophecies that declare that. And if those prophecies haven't been tested, then this is a concern that you've raised. I would highly encourage you to investigate them, to test them, and to see, do those prophecies claim that the antitypical David is given as a surety or a covenant or a witness to the people of what our Heavenly Family can do? And if that's the claim in the prophecy,
which it is,
I believe so as well. If that's the claim in the prophecy, if you come to that realization for yourself through your own study, then the profession has been quite clear from the beginning. I remember the day that Carol asked Trent outright, very directly, so have you been given victory over sin? And I could tell it put him on the spot, and it wasn't something that he had anticipated necessarily being asked right then, although I'm sure that he knew he would be asked it eventually. But he didn't beat around the bush or hum-ha. He did give a direct answer, and he told her that all glory to our Heavenly Family. And you can go back and listen to the recording of this. I have to look and see which one it really is. It might have been the one on Zechariah 3. Zechariah 3 fulfilled, possibly. Anyway, he said, all praise to our Heavenly Family, that ever since the night that I had talked to him and told him that I had something I had to tell him about, and I explained to him some of the dreams that I had had, and that being very directly revealing to me that he had been called by our Heavenly Family as a messenger. And I told him about the dreams, and I asked him, can you confirm or deny that? And he said, he and I didn't know each other. That was the first personal conversation we had ever had. And so he said, well, you'd have to ask our Heavenly Family. And I said, I already know the answer. I'm asking you for your sake. Because I could tell that he hadn't either accepted it or come to terms with it or recognized it or whatever the case may be. But I knew that he had been called to be the next messenger. Doug was dead. Trent was in Texas taking care of things. And there were many dreams, and Rebecca, you even had a vision, concerning the anointing of the next messenger. And so after I told him about the dreams, and I asked him that question, I didn't realize it at the time, but later he explained to me that when I told him, I already know the answer, I'm asking you for your sake, he said it was like a brick in the face. And he recognized, he had not accepted the calling that they had given him, and that he made a decision that night to do so. And he went out at night under the stars, knelt before our Heavenly Family, and completely turned his life and will over to them. And ever since then, they have kept him from falling. That was what he told Carol, and I believe that that has continued to be the case. And I see it happen over and over and over again, him being faced with circumstances that human wisdom and human nature could not come through victoriously. But our Heavenly Family brings him through victoriously. And he is and has been given as a witness and a covenant to us, so that even though we have a better example in Jesus, someone who never sinned, we do have an example today of someone who has chosen to sin no more. Now, we all understand, well, it's been taught in the message that sinning is giving into anything unloving. I just want to make a couple qualifications here, because this question came up in a recent study that I edited. Someone asked, can you sin and not know it? And the answer is, if you, let's say you know that the Sabbath is the seventh day of the week, and you know that if you violate the Sabbath, it's a sin. But let's say you're on a trip and it's a boat or a plane, you crash, whatever, you're unconscious for however long, and you are somewhere where you have no way of knowing what day of the week it is. And let's say you pick a day and count that as the seventh day of the week, but it's not the seventh day of the week. Technically, yes, if you're not observing the seventh day of the week, that would be a sin, but you don't know it because you don't know what day of the week it is. But you're still doing the best you can to observe that day. So that's the only aspect of violating the law that could not be considered a sin. But back to the main point is that, you know, it's never been a secret for those of us, especially part of this phase of the message from its inception. It's never been a secret that Trent has, when asked directly, confessed that, yes, our Heavenly Family has kept him from falling.
Then can you tell me, are you born again?
I am not born again.
Could I say something?
Yeah.
Hello? Okay.
Yeah.
The best thing, like, one of the hardest thing would be for when somebody's not here, you know, and it becomes very easy to, you know, not be able to, I'm trying to find the right words to say this, but, you know, to not see things, you know, and proofs of things. And when, you know, us being here, it has opened up my eyes to a lot of things. I'll just tell you my personal, okay, Rebecca, so you would understand that. I mean, I go back to knowing Trent, you know, from, you know, some years back, and so I've seen things and developments over years of, you know, when I first met him at just turning into 18, and you know, I've seen a lot of, I see the changes where he came out of where he was, and and I've seen the mindset in regards to the work he had to do and how committed he was doing it, and especially at the age in which he took this on. Long before, he got into the branch message, but he had taken things on and just moved. And we as a family, with the Spence family and our family, decided, as he decided to quit his job, to support him financially so he could work full time, because he was in turn helping us a lot, because he was getting a lot of work done that we ourselves couldn't do for investigation and things like that. Now, you got to take in mind that, at that time we're dealing with this young man, and we ourselves, are old people, and yet we were putting a lot of confidence and trust because of what we saw, the dedication. When everything happened in regards to meeting Brother Doug and everything, we saw and sort of knew something was happening. When it pushed closer towards Brother Doug's death, we basically knew where this was going to go. Just like my young daughter said, as soon as he found out that Brother Doug was passed away, the first thing she said, Salome, is like, is Trent going to be the prophet now? So even in that young child, not understanding a lot of things, and there was something that she knew and understood, and that's the first thing she said in the car to my wife when she found out. In my interaction with Trent doesn't show favors to me. I think sometimes he probably harder on me because he expects more from me, and that's one of the testing points with me in seeing a lot of things, is what, in fairness, a lot of people don't get to see the everyday interaction, right? How do you deal with the conflicts? What is the attitude? How do you deal with certain things? All these things people don't get to see. We have an opportunity to see that here. I was having troubles in regards to a reproof that I had to receive, and strongly so. And one day I I was having trouble with it. Is it Trent's own word, or is it, is it his own word, or is it the Spirit of God? How do I deal with this thing, right? And I rose up inside, right? But I also knew from my experience that I could call a meeting with him, which I did, and say, I need to talk to you. I also know that I could also say whatever is on my mind, and which he's used to by now. I'm just going to say what's on my mind and how I feel towards it. And I tell him that I rise up against him, in the rebuke or the correction in which I was given on my attitude towards certain things and some things that I did do. And I wanted clarification in regards to how, things were being dealt with. Is it his person? How does it interact? And I don't even know how to express it to you guys, but it was satisfactory for me to try and understand and understood, and the way it was given and everything else like that. And I would sit there and go, how can he separate himself from his reproofs? And he actually does. It's so hard to explain. See, and so when I see this, I go, that is not a simple thing for anybody to do. Because all of us, we rise up, and part of our emotions in regards to the things that we're doing, right? And in regards to our reproof or our correction to people and everything else like that. I don't see that. I was trying to see it so I could justify getting mad at him, right? But I don't see that. I see a quality that is hard for me to explain until a person is actually there seeing it for themselves. And so for me to say, is this man resurrected? I got asked that question. Well, I says, the kingdom has started. And people go, how do you know? I says, because I know that Joshua is here. And they said, well, how do you know? I said, because I've seen it myself. Because I started telling them about Nazi. I said, I've seen it myself. Okay? I don't understand all of the things around it. All I know is that my wife's sitting in the other room going, you need to give your testimony for what you, not for what anybody else. You need to give your testimony for you, for what you know, Michael, in order to help somebody else. If anybody's having any doubts on this, I'm telling you here as God is my witness, all right? And if I get reproved tomorrow strong on something, I know I could still walk away and says God was in it. Because in every time that I got reproved or every time we had to talk about something in disagreement and everything, every bit of it was in a love that I have never experienced from anybody correcting me on anything. Ever. Not even my own parents. And that is not something that you just practice or you study. It doesn't work that way. Now, I don't want to give the impression that I'm just up here getting in trouble all the time, because it seems, but I'm just trying to, my wife going, yeah, you are, but I'm just trying to let you all know from our own experience and my own experience here and the things that I'm learning, the things that I try to explain to people. There is just too much information for just anybody to have comprehended in such a short period of time. There is too much tender care towards people. There's too much tears shed for all of us, for such a young man to take on. It is not normal, quote. It's not normal. This, so far to me, has been the most abnormal situation I've experienced in my 52, God's willing, for 53 years this year. Okay? So from what I am seeing here, I can only testify for me. And I am absolutely glad where I am. I was just talking to my mother today and called her about this. And I said, Mother, I have never been in a more happier situation. I have my own struggles I got to deal with. I have, people around that I got to deal with struggles on and everything else like that. But I said to her, I am in a happy place because I know and I've seen it. And I've said, you know what? I could be there. I could get there. Because I've seen it. And when you go back and think about it with the issue of Joshua, right, that's exactly what it was. We had to behold it, in order to become changed. We had to see it. And once we saw it, we go, it is absolutely possible, because you see certain qualities that you want in your life. This is not trying to uplift any one person as a respecter of person. This is just telling the truth as this is what I see. If it was somebody else and that was the qualities, that is what I would be talking about. Okay? So I take my reproofs and I take my encouragement, because I get a lot of encouragement to move forward. And if I get a reproof on something, it is what it is. and my whole attitude have changed now in how I look at those reproofs. Because now I realize it's a sincerity of heart to want us to give it all up, to set our lives free. And because I see that when I hear the reproofs, hey, I may not like, the chastising of the Lord is not always, pleasant, but I at least now know in my heart that it's because He wants the best for me and the best for my family and my children. And so I'm encouraging all of you right now, okay? There is nothing else out there that I honestly, my heart bleeds right now for Carol, because I always used to say to my own self, if I was to give this up, where in the world would I go? What would I do? I can't erase what I already know. I will be tormented. Just like when I was playing football, I hope I'm not going too long, but I have to. I seldom say anything, on this. But when I was playing football, I was tormented. Every Saturday game, I was tormented. Every Friday night game, I was tormented. Every Saturday afternoon game, I was tormented. To the point where I couldn't do it anymore. Okay? Because I can't undo what I already know to be true. And now looking back at it, it wasn't even that much. I was going to post something today on what I saw on Facebook. On Facebook today, because I was talking to Ann about it. I says, we went through a situation where we were taught how to think, and we were shown about free. It was a free thinking thing. It was not a legislated. It was free thinking. We were given the ability to freely think. This is how you think. This is investigate, test everything, test everything, test everything. See if it is true. See if it is. Check it all out. And giving up things that we thought was true before. And we were going through learning how to test everything. And all along we kept accepting it as the truth. And then we got to a point where we take that very truth that we were taught, and we get to a point and we say, we're going to test this, and then we say, oh, wait a minute. Then Jesus doesn't exist, and this doesn't exist, and so I'm giving this up. And I'm sitting there going, well, how does that make any sense? The reason you got to this point of being able to test all these things is because you accepted all these things as true means of testing things. And then you take the truth of testing things to deny the very thing that was brought to you in the first place. I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say in regards to that, but it's just, my mind is just blown away with that. The reason we're where we are and why we're allowed to test everything freely is because we believed the method was true, and the method was honest, and the method was viable. And that was the method that brought us to the better understanding of where we are today. But then we take on the flip side, we take that very truth and we use it to reject the very truth in which it brought us to. And it's mind-boggling for us. So don't allow that to be a catalyst to question so deeply on the wrong side of things. Don't let the truth be the thing that you use to reject the truth. Because the only way we're even where we are, if we had continued in the error, we're saying if we'd continued in the error, I would have been happier there. But we were given a method to find out the truth, and when we got there, we say, we're going to use that to reject the truth. How does that make any sense? It's what got us here in the first place. So we need to really, really, in all honesty, stop and say, wait a minute. Where was I the happiest? Was I happy in the error that I was following? Because that's what we're saying when we get this far in the truth and start questioning whether or not where we're going is the truth. We're saying we were happier knowing the lie. And we need to really think about that seriously. All right? And so, I just know from where I am, I basically handed over everything. Life was going a certain way, and I stopped and looked at it, and I'm serious. I'm sitting in here right now from a 3,600 square foot house and a pool outside, okay, to living in a 33-foot, 0.5, RV, running back and forth to get water, a little fireplace on here. Every once in a while I'm trying to make sure the septic don't freeze up. And yet I'm sitting there going, man alive. I'm actually more happy where I am right now than I was where I was. It's all about the quality, not about the quantity at this point for me. So, and on top of it, I had to leave my 4 oldest children, to come here. So that's just what I wanted to say.
That was good to hear, Michael. Thank you.
So, obviously we're not going to get to another question or anything like that, and I don't know if there's any other comments that anyone has on the subjects upon which we're discussing. But I'll just mention, in relation to all these different issues and everything, and what the message speaks of in terms of how our Heavenly Family wants to go about bringing salvation to the world. Really teaching people how to stop sinning and so on. It is possible, and this is one of the first things that I realized. It is possible to obtain salvation by looking directly to Christ without the example of another human being. Sure, the example of another human being can help, and it's supposed to help. Like Paul, he talks to the people to whom he wrote letters and said, be a follower of me even as I'm a follower of Christ. He's saying, follow my example, because the life that I live in the flesh is not mine, but it's the life of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. So he's living the life of Christ in order to show them what it is. And that's a good thing. That's for their benefit. Yet at the same time, and Paul, if you read his letters, he did a lot of quote-unquote boasting. But he only boasted in the things which emphasized his weakness and the strength of Christ. And so all of his boasting was boasting, quote-unquote, in the Lord. So here's the thing. When Doug was coming to the end of his life, Doug and I would talk a lot. And one of the things, he was more aware of his own death, spiritually speaking, than anyone else that I had ever met. And still, if I compare his knowledge of his own sinfulness to people that I know today, still he had a clearer conception of his own sinfulness than most people have. And I remember talking to him about, so what's the deal? Where do you go from there? What's the remedy? And he himself really had convinced himself that he was so far gone in terms of his own sin that someone else had to be justified first in order for them to be able to help him to overcome his sin. he really thought that that was the case. And you know what? Unfortunately, it was, but only because he convinced himself of it. But it's not actually the case. And that's one of the first things that I learned. That was one of the most important realizations that I had in dealing with my own sin, is that I realized that, hey, wait a second. If we all have that mindset where we need someone else to do it first in order to help us, no one is going to receive it. So it must be the case that we can look directly to our Heavenly Family and to learn the truth. Not to say that we don't learn the truth through a messenger. That's not what I'm referring to. Obviously we do, but we can. We don't need to obtain righteousness by having someone else live out the example of Christ, because all they're doing is pointing you to Christ to begin with. All they're doing is showing you the principles, living it out, teaching it, and so on and so forth. And that's just testifying of Christ. But guess what? We have the scriptures testifying of Christ. We have the message testifying of Christ. And we can go to our Heavenly Family and ask them to reveal to us our own wickedness and their own love. And surely, and I can testify, they will and they have. And that's what we have to realize, that our salvation is not to be found in an individual. While they may be the instrument that our Heavenly Family uses to bring us to salvation, we can learn the truth directly, or we can learn the truth from them. And that's where ultimately we must go. We must, yes, take, like the people in Paul's day, they, in following him, even as he followed Christ, what that was doing is they were constantly being pointed to look to Christ, to receive righteousness from him. And today it's no different. And that's what I had to realize is, you know what? No. I have to be able to, I can't allow myself to be convinced that someone else has to do it first, or someone else has to show me how to be born again and all of that. No, I need to go to our Heavenly Family. I need to accept the message that they send, recognize it, study it, really try and understand it, and ultimately I need to just put aside myself. And, that's, again, one of the key factors that brought me on that night to be able to realize that, no, I need to just lay myself before them. And so that's, yes, the message does proclaim that right now our Heavenly Family has already begun the work of raising people from death in trespasses and sin. And even though they've been trying to do that all along, the message does declare that that has started to happen as of March 2013. And we, and our Heavenly Family has given me and anyone else who is willing to accept the task, the duty of proclaiming the message and living out the example. We're supposed to be living letters and examples of what the life of Christ is like. And, we're supposed to do that. And ultimately, that's just the point to our Heavenly Family. So while I understand the desire to see it lived out in another human being, and while I acknowledge the benefit that has, and that's how the gospel is to go forward. We are supposed to receive the righteousness of Christ and live it out to others so that they will see it and it will be a light to the world. But at the same time, I don't want us to lose sight of the nature of that, and that ultimately it comes down to accepting the principles of truth within yourself that will lead you to live the life of pure righteousness and love, regardless of any other individual. Paul talked about, himself, and if he was to turn from the truth, how people should continue on with the gospel that they had received. In the Apocryphon of James, Jesus talks about how if someone really understands the truth, they will continue on with the kingdom, even if the Father, God himself, was to refuse them. It does not hinge upon one individual or another. Individuals are a means of learning, but we ought to take those principles and allow them to embody us and us to embody those principles. And that's how we can really progress. So the message is what it is. The means of the gospel going forward is what it is. But let us see it in its purity as being the living out and the exemplification of the principles of love and truth, and let that be our focus. So anyway, that's my final comment on this. And if there's nothing else, would anyone like to thank our Heavenly Family for the meeting and ask them to bless us as we depart?
I just wanted to give time for people if they did have anything else, but if no one does have anything else, I'll be happy to thank our Heavenly Family. Well, Heavenly Family, again, yes, thank you for a wonderful meeting. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss anything and everything that are on the hearts of your people. And I just want to ask that these principles of truth would really sink home in the minds of each one of us, and that if there are still questions that anyone has, issues, struggles that people are having, that they would be strengthened to persevere and to not withdraw and to separate and try to do things independent of the encouragement that you have to offer. Heavenly Family, I am so very grateful that you have given us the abundance of evidence that you have. And as we've discussed tonight, I'm struck by your love and mercy and how, we shouldn't need to have anyone here and now representing what you already did for us, dear brother. And yet, you have given it to us. And Heavenly Family, I just want to ask that for the sake of everyone here, that you would continue to work on my heart. And I thank you for revealing the truth of myself to me some time back and showing me wherein I still lack, so that I'm not left deceived. So thank you. We need you so very much. Please continue to strengthen us, guide us, multiply the angels, the messengers from the other worlds that you send to fight for us. Help us to be willing to do our part. And we thank you and we ask all this in the name of Branch. Amen.
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 All right. Well, I know that there are more questions. Thank you guys seriously for asking your questions. I'm seriously grateful for the fact that we're getting to discuss these really important things and crucial things.
Me too.
And
I want things to be real between us.
Absolutely. So, again, thank you guys for putting yourselves out there to ask these questions, and I'm looking forward to being able to discuss these things more and getting to the other questions that you guys have. So, love you all very much.
Lila Tov.
Lila Tov. Have a good night.
Lila Tov.
Good night.